All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second budget session. Yeah, I think we've got some really good things to dig in on. I did want to add a quick announcement because it's been a hot topic, which is working with Xylem on the Ellis Pond situation. And Josue, I just thought, like, if you could just briefly, I know you guys met today and it sounded like you had a good meeting. 30-second, like, update.
Sure,
You
sure.
guys should probably call to order.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, all right. So, yeah, before we do that, yes,
That
let's
part.
call this meeting to order. Judy?
Excellent. House,
Yes.
Stokes,
Yes.
McQueen,
Yes.
Brown,
Here.
DeVore Leonard.
Here.
Also present, Village Manager Josue Salmeron, Planning and Zoning Administrator Denise Swinger, Public Works Director Johnny Burns, and Police Chief Paige Burge.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, so,
Thank you, Brian. And coincidentally, I was able to send out an email literally seconds before arriving here. So I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. But in short, we had a very productive conversation with Xylem where I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what they could and could not do and what they're willing to do. And so we outlined a plan, both a short-term, intermediate, and long-term plan on how to resolve many of the challenges at Ellis Pond and tapping into the resources. So it consists of three elements. One is a monitoring system. So we'll work on defining a monitoring system to measure certain conditions in the pond. And Socrates, who's the scientist and technical expert, we'll have a meeting with Yvonne to define what those parameters will be. They can do dissolved oxygen, pH, nitrogen, and a few other things. But ultimately for them, they have a corporate responsibility to know how the data is going to be used and whether there needs research to be published from it. So he'll need to define that for Xylem. On the service projects, we talked about means of filamentous algae removal and nutrient removal, and we came up with two tangible ways. One is a mechanical process, and another is a biological process. And the biological process, let's start with the mechanical. Mechanical is very obvious, ripping it out through means. The biological aspect will be plants and fish. What kind of low-hanging fruit, low-cost opportunities we could explore to introduce biological agents, in this case fish and plants, that will reduce and mitigate the nitrogen and other chemicals that the plants are feeding off, and then ultimately work towards dredging of the pond. So we got a pretty good outline. We seem to have a clear understanding of roles and responsibility and how we could synchronize our efforts so that we're working effectively. So that's the short update.
sweet. And I love that. I appreciated, Gavin highlighting the positive at our last meeting that, we're all, like, coordinating now, which is great. And I think long-term, I love that you mentioned Yvonne, and I think, it's going to be great for the Environmental Commission to be able to inform some of that long-term planning as well. So, Carmen, thank you for making that outreach. Obviously Xylem is a huge partner in this. So, and as a side note, like, I'm going to be doing some jazz singing later, but I have a little bit of a sore throat, and so yeah.
Well, I'm
hopefully
vice
you guys
president.
will like my new voice.
I guess I need to back you up.
It sounds good. So let's move into the agenda, and I'm glad that we moved the PD budget up to the top. Again, I want to emphasize I actually watched the meeting twice, believe it or not. Chief Burge, I'm very impressed with the analysis that you've kind of brought to the table, which is really new for us, and I think very informative. So I guess I want to open it up to whatever questions folks have. I know I have a few, and then we'll move from there. So, and again, I want to mention for the public, the intention was that video was going to be for all of council to be able to watch, understanding that some of us work, some of us had like another meeting, but Kevin and Gavin certainly asked lots of questions. So yeah, you represented council well. So anyway, so Mary Ann.
Or not? It's not indicated.
Oh, I'm not sure what you have there. No,
That's just one.
Yeah, I have comments, mostly maybe questions. First, I really appreciate your analyses, and think I got conceptually the main changes that you wanted to make, shifts to the dispatch. Well, that was one of the big ones. Also, the issue of overtime and retention and the cost savings regarding that. So I really appreciate our senior staff, period, and all the rest of the staff too, which also makes it hard then to look at budgets and try and figure out how to cut things. So I don't want to try to make drastic changes. I mean, I would not recommend drastic changes to any department unless we were just totally in a crisis, which I don't think we are. At the same time, I'm hopeful that we do make some examinations of the police department, the public safety department, looking at what it is that the people in the department actually do. How much is involved in crime? How much is involved in things like going out and helping someone in their home? And do a deep dive analysis to look at, are there ways that we could have other non-officer people doing some of the things that happen in the department? I also am not convinced that we need to have two people on duty all the time. Those are the kind of, on the road, and those are the kind of things that, some of the things that I would want to look into, hopefully coming out of our workshop.
Mm-hmm.
The only question I think I had in particular about this year's budget was I was concerned about, you listed a new vehicle, but then I didn't see it when I went through the long budget thing, so I wasn't clear. And if we were going to purchase a new vehicle, I would want it to be a hybrid. I don't think it makes sense to purchase a police vehicle unless it is, even if it costs more money. So.
Sure. And actually, one of the things that was outlined in my proposal is that we hope to be entirely hybrid or all electric by 2031. So in the proposal for the capital budget, we did estimate the cost based on a totally electric Blazer, which Josue had the opportunity to see in person at one of his managers' meetings. Is that
At the
right?
ICMA.
Okay. And so yes, the cost that we included in there was the cost of an all-electric
No,
vehicle.
cool. But it didn't, when it was in the budget, the whole budget, it was zero. It wasn't good.
We grouped it in capital.
There is a capital document
Oh,
that,
okay,
yeah.
because I was looking for it and I didn't see it.
Yeah, we did, it's in one of the line items, and it's not in the vehicle replacement fund. There's a vehicle replacement fund that was established, but our most recent vehicle transactions hasn't taken place out of that fund. It's been spent out of the 101, which is our general fund, 1201, which is police department operating expenses.
So was it 37,000? That seems low.
I think we upgraded that. I'm not sure if I made that mistake in my presentation. I think we came in at 45. Is that right?
I saw a 40-something number.
Yeah,
That
I think
sounds-
it was 45. So if I didn't update it in my
That's not bad.
presentation. No, it wasn't at all.
Yeah.
The longevity of an all-electric vehicle would be much different than a standard. So.
And Josue, by the way, I'm getting a impression from Lacey that you need to do a better job of speaking into your mic.
Okay.
So,
All right, thank you.
I don't know, I saw a look that, yeah. Okay, other questions or comments?
I really did appreciate, Chief Burge, all the detail you went into, and as Brian, I think, alluded to, the analysis, and I believe I shared my appreciation during your presentation. And then you and I communicated via email earlier today. I guess, speaking of vehicles, I think the only thing that struck me was sticking to a standard replacement cycle in at this time, if we feel like we're under duress, if you will, regarding the budget, if we need to pull back on something, I would just submit that you know, maybe keeping a vehicle a little bit longer might be considered low-hanging fruit in terms of shifting some dollars from one direction to another. And I think that is really, in my heart of hearts, the only thing that I would want to submit as a potential area for cuts. And I would just, whether there are other areas in the PD budget, you know, I would want to leave that to your discretion. But I think during the presentation, that was one thing that struck me, like, you know, at home, I keep the car a little bit longer unless I wreck it like I did. You know, so again, I think that's just an area for low-hanging fruit that we might want to consider. If the PD budget needs to be cut to make the entire village budget work. Okay.
Yeah, and then there is that caveat that, you know, I think you also emphasized that when we kick the can down the road, it means it's going to be more expensive. So, yeah, so I think that's a good, you know, kind of balance point. Gavin, Carmen?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I appreciated how comprehensive the plan was, that your mathematical formula was easy to follow. I did have a question too about the vehicle, but that just got answered. No, overall it was, well, not even overall, it was excellent. It was an excellent presentation, and like I said, I appreciate the detail that you went into and the analysis. And one of the things that really stuck out for me was kind of the chart with the years and then the listing of, you know, criminal offenses.
Yeah.
And, you know, including what you did as opposed to, you know, jaywalking or red light run, you know. So you put the really important stuff in there that I think that I was concerned about and wanted to see. So that was good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just, you know, highlight off of that, I think, maybe, you know, other departments doing something similar about, like, you know, that analysis around head counts could be helpful just to make the case for how we keep, you know, the village running in a, like, thriving manner. So, yeah, I like that. So I had a couple things. One was, I just wanted to be clear, because we talked about this after the meeting, that the projections around body cams are about matching grant money. So, and not like that we're gonna be purchasing this equipment outright. So I just wanted to make sure everyone, and you alluded to that, but I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that piece. So I do think, since it came up, we could cost out what changing our dispatch scenario looks like. I am adamantly opposed to that, and I think, you know, you highlighted the value of dispatch, and I've never been supportive, but since I heard those questions, I think we could price that out. And I think, you know, for full disclosure, we should do that. And again, you know, you emphasize that, like, costs for going through Greene County have increased. But I guess, you know, I'd like to either lay that to rest or whatever we need to do, you know, but I think there are some components of that are, you know, beyond just like what the money looks like. But I think the reality is, you know, we could cost that out and like find out like what Greene County would require. I mean, this reminds me of things like, you know, when there was talk about, you know, doing the water line to Springfield, and and Johnny's emphasized that he was in meetings where that wasn't even like a practical thing to do. So anyway, so I just, I think it would be good, since that like continues to be an issue that comes up, just to sort of say, all right, here's what they're quoting, and then we could also talk about here's what we lose. Because yeah, I cannot imagine not having our dispatch just based on the community we have. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, I spent a great deal of time in that presentation discussing dispatch, trying to highlight the actual workload that they have. They're the switchboard of the entire organization, so I think we kind of underestimate all the work that they do, not just for the police department, but for the whole village. But just because I knew this would come up, and we have the work session coming up as well, I already have an inquiry in for a quote for what it would be to transfer over entirely.
Cool.
So
Thanks. I mean, I think, I've heard like other council members mention this as well, is just, we should know the numbers, but there are a variety of factors
Yeah.
that we need to look at. It's not just about
Yeah.
like the bottom line.
And-
So,
And,
Can I
and
add-
if I may just add to that piece, and Brian, there are other costs that we have started to look at. So in our last conversation, we're looking at dispatch costs. Johnny brought up what are the public works needs in terms of power outages, water main breaks, all the public works utility, and having after hours people to answer those calls or take those calls. So we would need call center services for public works and other municipal services. And so we will be pricing that out, and that will be separate than the Xenia dispatch cost.
yep. Marianne?
So I think in regard to whether or not we have dispatch, that's more a bigger conversation than we can have here. And I think we'll probably touch on that and maybe talk about it next year. So I don't want to talk about that. But what I did want to say, apropos to what the two of you were saying, is if the dispatch serves as sort of the central contact point for a lot of things coming into the village, then we might want to think about not having it be budgeted out solely to the police department. I mean, if it's serving for the utilities and general questions, then should some of that budget be considered in terms of administration or the
Mhm.
utilities, so that it's not just seen as the police budget? Because I think still, I haven't seen the pie chart that you do so well both way, but my memory is that the police department is the biggest expense of the general fund. And if some of the things are actually going to other services, at least that needs to be clear, if not budgeted to other services. The other thing I wanted to say was, given that we apparently have a huge shortfall, I did notice that last year we had 8 full-time staff, not counting dispatch. And you want to have one,
the full-time you mean, you're
not discounting dispatch officers. Last year we had the chief, the 2 corporals, and 5 full-time officers, 1 part-time. And you want to add 1 more person for 2023, or maybe
Yep, deputy chief,
chief deputy.
but not renewing the 2 sergeants that were in 2020 and 2021, so.
for the 2022 staffing, though, there's no sergeant. There's 1 chief, no sergeant.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So
So there were-
2020, we had 2
There were
sergeants,
8
so,
full-time last year, and you're asking to add 1 more as the chief deputy.
I hate to use the word add because it's really in lieu of, and I think that's what Brian's trying to say. So if you look at the 2020 staffing from the presentation, we actually had 11 total officers. Those positions have not been completely refilled. So the 2 sergeants' positions would not be filled in lieu of this chief deputy position, which is actually a cost saving when you look at the salaries from the previous sergeants.
Well, to get to the point, is if we're gonna have to be making the kind of cuts that I understand we're having to make, then some of that rightly should come from the police department, I think. And maybe that would be up to you, where those cuts would be, but that might be one of the cuts.
Well, I think that's a good placeholder because we still need to get clarity around whether that 1.2 million is with everything we want or with cuts, which will come up next. So, because I'm not clear on that myself, like, you know, what that shortfall is about. So, but I think that's a good thing to
And I
bring.
would suggest what the role of the person would be is that if it comes to the kind of cuts that I thought we were gonna have to make, then it seems like some cuts would have to be made at that.
Yep. So that's what I'm saying. I agree. That's an important, like, placeholder to, like, keep. Last thing I'm gonna say is, I am supportive of the, wage scale adjustments. I think that was also thoughtful analysis and needs to be thought about across the organization. And, you know, overtime has driven me crazy forever. And I get, like, you know, COVID put us in, like, a weird situation, but, I mean, this council has talked about the overtime thing forever. And so I appreciated that you focused on that, and yeah, I want to lock that down. So, anything else for Paige?
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. I was able to get some of that information that you requested as well for that meeting, and I have the copies of that for you, so I'll give that over to you.
And I saw some of it was in your budget,
It
more
was, yeah.
detailed than, I hadn't seen the budget yet.
Cool. All right. So I think, Josue, we're transitioning into where we're at after last meeting from your perspective.
All right, sure. We did do some cuts, some adjustments. We took our budget from,
Do you want me to put something up on Zoom?
sure, if you want to put my presentation, I'm on
What
slide.
are you, all funds budget, budget summary, budget presentation?
The budget discussion presentation, the PDF file, slide number 4. I skipped over slides 2. I think you know what we do, right? I think the only thing I will add to the police department fund is that, you know, that it is, while it's predominantly the police department, it's the public safety fund, which encompasses a little bit more than just law enforcement. That's where we do, obviously we're doing the community outreach, we do boots and coats, we do assistance on utilities and rent assistance out of that same department. So there are a lot of other things that we do other than just police work. One of the reasons why we dispatch absorbs the after-hours calls is because they're all typically public safety related, and the department itself is public safety. And so there is no easy way of allocating that personnel across multiple departments and funds. It just makes it sense for it to be in the way it is. Now, that is not to say that other expenses couldn't be covered from different funds. So, for example, we pay for our HyperReach alert system. That is the text message and call system. When we have an emergency, we can send out a mass text and an alert system. We typically reserve that for village-wide incidents, like a village-wide power outage or a tornado warning, things of that nature. But, you know, things like that could probably be costed out or allocated across different departments. But typically all that stays in public safety. So I'm skipping over that slide. I think you've heard us talk about the challenges. We've exhausted a lot of the cost-saving measures. When you compound that with the hyperinflation, supply chain issues, and just the economics we find ourselves in, that includes labor market issues. A lot of the deferred maintenance is really coming to a head. So in that environment, it really creates like the perfect storm for a lot of these economic challenges. So that's where we're operating in. But highlights on the changes, the revised budget that we made. We went through our first round of cuts. So we took our general fund budget from $5,568,538.14 down to $5,003,588. So we've cut over $500,000 of expenses. That leaves a gap of 1.2 million, or a little bit over that, that we still need to cut to get to a more balanced budget. These process of doing these incremental cuts, they're not new for us on our end. This is the year that we're bringing you sort of a work in progress at the request of council, that you want to see how we're making the cuts as we go along. So the first round of cuts, you know, I don't know if Johnny has recovered emotionally from our last meeting to go into it, but you know, we made those first round of cuts, and it's the reality of the business that there are things that we need, that we want to do, that have to get cut, because they're nothing's easy to cut, but these are sort of the easier items to.
So,
Could you talk about some of them, if there are major things that were cut?
well, and actually, like, I'll just advance a question, which is the 1.2 million shortfall.
Mhm.
Is that reflective of like this round of cuts?
The 1.2 is, yes.
Yeah.
We took out over
Okay.
500,000 of cuts. So if it didn't reflect that, it would be closer to 1.7 million that we have a gap for.
Okay, all right.
So
Back to
Johnny,
you,
do you want to talk
yeah.
about some of the things that we cut?
Well, it's all in their paper, it's all highlighted. Anything that's in the 23 column that's not highlighted yellow got cut. It didn't make the grade.
Are there major things that you would consider to be safety related?
Well, you got $70,000, so we reduced it to $55,000 in sidewalk. We reduced $3,500 in curb repair, striping, crack seal. Let's see, $34,000 in towable signs that we rent more than 5-6 times a year. That's
In the library building, we cut the parking lot, the seal and coating the parking lot, so we're only doing the windows.
the pool budget went from $83,000 to $28,950. Cut out all the concrete repairs, the pool repairs, water loss problem at the pool.
No new diving boards?
No new
You
diving
cut
board.
out water loss
Um,
repairs for the pool?
Parks was, trash can, stonework at the front, ball diamonds, anything to do with the ball diamonds. That's all the general revenue.
So Johnny, since we're on ball diamonds, I mean, honestly, have we gotten any like support from the users?
We had a group of volunteers that is willing to go out there and try to do some stuff. And after last meeting, I told them, go ahead, because they can't make it no worse, and we're not gonna do anything with it. So I did get a quote from a person that does take care of some major ball diamonds around here. They are all school-owned, they're not public parks. And I think the quote was almost $20,000 just for one diamond.
Wow.
And so we're gonna allow the volunteers that think that they know what to do, have at it. Because we've not got any money from the schools. I keep hearing that, you know, they sent checks or whatever, because that's what they're saying, but at the end of the day, we have to cut budget, and we're here to service the village. We're not here to make ball diamonds ready for the high school.
Well, and I feel like, since, we got money out of the artists, I don't understand why they can't come to the playing field.
Majority of the time in the summer is spent, my guys mowing grass or taking care of ball diamonds. And that is not fair to the rest of the 3,700 people that live in this town. We should be doing storm water work, we should be building curbs and catch basins and things like that, and not doing ball diamonds.
Mhm.
I mean, we work all day, literally 4 guys work all day, and we have a rain shower 20 minutes before the play, and we've lost all that time. I mean, last year we put, I think it's almost 60 bags of quick dry on the field, and 20 minutes before the game, it rained, so everything that my guys worked for, on top of, we didn't realize that they had actually went and switched fields and went to that team's field, because their field was dry and ours was not, and we wasn't informed until an hour before the game. So, it's an easy one to cut for me and an easy one to cut for my staff as well, because they get criticized all day long anyway, so, we just do what we can do, keep moving forward.
So the volunteers, excuse me, Brian, so John, the volunteers would maintain the diamonds?
They will not maintain it. What they're gonna do is they're gonna try to bring in brick dust and all the things that we're being told needs to be done. They just think that they can do it, and they're the people that actually use the field. Little League is now using that field, some other teams are not using that field. And the high school on top of, they wanna be able to have their players come out there and do the raking and the dragging and stuff like that, so. At the end of the day, I don't have the finances to keep making a field ready for other people's use.
And I thought those amounts, I mean, I agree. I think, you know, they're large. If they're not like playing ball with us, so to speak, then, you know, I think that's the right decision. But it sounds like, you know, maybe there's some other frustration. So I guess I don't want to forget the idea that, you know, we've talked about that we could do a bond initiative. So I guess the question is, are we cutting like, you know, and I think others have already like asked this, like things that we need to, you know, not delay. And that's where, I mean, you know, we still have a AAA rating, and, you know, we could do something transformative.
When you talk about bond and when you talk about initiatives, to me, I don't go to ball diamonds and all that. I go to
Yeah.
curbs, gutters, infrastructure, sewer lines, water lines, electric system. That's where I go to try to get the most done, and not I mean, we could go out there and put blacktop down, make every street look good, but if you don't fix what's underneath of it, there's no reason to fix it. Let them drive and hit potholes.
Right.
So, I mean, I went through my entire budget on every line item. We did lower costs in operating, we did lower costs and what we're doing blacktopping, we did lower, I went through and cut budget, and that was the cuts that you seen. So,
Brian,
Yeah.
can we just take a step back and just put this in context for a second? So just help me understand where we're going. Are we doing this with staffing, with every department? Like what, I'm trying to understand, like, because we didn't get any of these before, right? This is just here, right? So like, just for I got a document today at 2 o'clock. I was working and right up until we got here. There was another document that came a night or two ago. So if we could just take a second and like just shape this. Maybe some of y'all had time to look at it, but this is, I mean, and just to be totally blunt, like it would be really helpful to get better information sooner. Like this is like a lot of information to try to figure out how to wrap our heads around right now. Unless at least we spend a few minutes right now, just help us understand what's here. What is this? Is this, because this is all the stuff from Johnny that we went through, but I don't see a comparable thing for PD. I don't see a comparable thing for administration. I don't see a comparable thing for, so maybe I'm missing something because I just got the documents, but I need some context of where we're going here.
Yeah. So where you're looking there, those are the capital expenditures. all
Okay.
those sheets that you have in front of your capital expenditures. Capital expenditures for PD are included in the presentation, and where those numbers roll up into are the budgets that you have. In the
Okay,
budgets
when you
that
say
you have.
which documents are you talking about?
So you have two forms of the budget. You have a summary of the budget, which is a 5-page document that is just super high level. What are the totals by the departments? And
Is that in budget packet 2?
Yes, that's in
Okay.
budget packet too.
And this is different from what was given to us before the last meeting? This is with the updated versions?
yes.
And are there, so when we're talking about the changes of cuts of $500,000, is that exclusively cuts in public works, or are there changes in other areas?
There were changes in other areas,
Smaller,
smaller.
okay?
right.
So this document that starts on page 34, is that what you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay,
So that breaks down the general fund activity, all the funds by fund, and you're getting a full breakout. What are we gonna spend on postage? What are we paying on telephone? It breaks out all the different categories. And so that runs through, pages 47. So you get that category view. Then the summary budget is on page 48, which you're getting just you're getting just the fund and the category. What's capital, what's contractual services, debt service, materials and supplies, miscellaneous, personnel, transfers, and travel and training.
so that's the part that's basically a comp to what we got before the last meeting?
Yeah, well, both of these documents have the totals rolled up.
I understand, but before the last meeting, we basically just got this summary that starts on page
You got
48 or whatever.
You got what was all general fund.
Yeah,
The
okay.
first meeting, it was all general fund activity.
Got it,
We
okay.
included what is funded by general fund activity, and that is 202, 204, and 306. Those are funds that we take money from the general fund as a transfer to fund those activities and those projects. So
Okay.
here you're getting the full budget. The big picture. The big picture is that our budget is $15,620,112.
But I do want to pull out, we had the info on the PD capital well before this meeting. I mean, that was already, that hasn't
Yeah.
changed. So I
You're
think
talking about the
what
stuff that
has
Paige
changed.
shared,
Huh?
the stuff that Paige shared.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and so
I mean,
the-
we had that, like.
No, I have
prior
that stuff.
to-
I just,
Right.
right
So,
now,
I mean, just so, yeah,
Yeah,
great
we-
questions, but I just to delineate, like,
Okay.
what's changing is the other
And
pieces.
outside of those documents, everything else is operational. So, they're in the council budgets or the administration budgets. There are professional services for what we pay for clerk base, for AML, for the GIS system. All of those expenses are rolled up in our operating budgets.
okay,
Those are things that the different department heads, administrative staff have deemed that we need those, right? I've talked to Judy about the council budget. What do you need for clerk base? Clerk base is a system, we upload all the meeting documents and all that. All of those items are not broken out in an itemized form, they're rolled up into their prospective operating line items.
okay. We could do better, I mean, like, I'm looking at these we don't even have headers on the pages of like what the years are. It's like, this is, I look at budgets for a living, and this is really hard to process all this. So I'm saying this in part for people at home, for my fellow council members who must also struggle with trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
If we want to have a meaningful role, and I think we do in a healthy way, in participating in this process, we gotta have, so like, I would like to see, so if this isn't all of the numbers that are $500,000 different, send it to us before so we can look at it. Flag the stuff that's the most important so we have some context. I'm just trying to say, as we're going through this today and over the next steps we get to passing a budget, give us the context to help us have a meaningful role in the process. Otherwise, if we don't know this information, we can't meaningfully engage with it. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I
There's no-
totally concur.
Yes, it makes sense.
I mean, yeah, I guess I could go buy a thing like you have and you have if I had the money to do it, but I don't have the, you know, I'm not set up to look, to have something in my house that looks like this. And so, I mean, I can't read this. And then to get it a couple hours or an hour before the meeting, I can read this, but we didn't have this before either. So and I can imagine how frustrating it is to do this, especially having to, had all these things, for example, that you want to do, and then you're cutting them. So I think we all want to be as helpful as we can, but, I mean, the way it's being presented, it's either sort of like we go, yeah, okay, you do whatever you have to do, or, well, I mean, that's about all. That's sort of the alternative, the only alternative. And that the police department was one thing, and Johnny's is another, and the general is another. And I know that we didn't have a financial officer, and that makes it very difficult.
It's a big role.
It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's huge, so I think it will be much better
So-
next year. I think
So
they
I
did
don't know,
pretty good
maybe
considering.
we want to take longer on the process, so we have time, so we can.
Well, and the good news is we have taken longer on the process, so we still have a month and a half. So I guess on a flip side, what I would say is that so I think the PD thing, very clear. We got all the details we needed, and people watched the video and like reviewed all the documents. And then what I appreciate that we asked for was uncut, like what's everything we want to do. And now what we're looking at is like what cuts potentially look like for a balanced budget. And so I think this is where I come back to me, like a big decision point is, are we going to try to like do more of this stuff and not like cut everything, which is where I think Johnny's time is valuable. And then we still have a month and a half to like shore up documents and whatever. So, so I guess, related to that, I want to come back to, should we be considering a bond initiative to deal with infrastructure stuff? But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. I don't generally consider something that's like $2,000 to be a capital expense. So maybe I'm used to, I always have thought of capital projects as like big ticket items, whereas all these little things are included in capital. I would have assumed that, Johnny, you would have a lump sum in your budget for projects that are under, I don't know, $20,000 or something. And then big projects would be capital. So I'd like some education around how that works.
Well, because it is a transfer, we normally have capital as a capital budget. You're gonna take and put money into capital every year so that you're building up that capital funds to be able to do projects like diving boards that are $5,000. You don't put that in operating, or you don't put it in general fund, because then what happens is then your operating goes up and you're asking, well, why can't you cover operating? Well, because we put all these small projects into the operating, which is not really operating, it's actually special projects, because you gotta have new diving boards and you gotta plan for that. And I went out 10 years, so you can know that, we're gonna have a $8,000 expense for a motor to be rebuilt in 4 years. And then another 4 years down the road, you're gonna have another 8,000. So now you got to look at projections and figure out how much money do we need to start putting back for capital expenses. Problem is, we're too damn far behind the 8 ball. We don't have capital funds for this. So therefore, when you talk about transfers and revenue, it's not just for operating. Now it includes capital, because we don't have capital funds. So therefore, capital projects, if we had capital funds, you would still wanna see all these $2,000 jobs, because you're also saying, okay, so we're getting this done, we're getting that done. Man, the capital funds are shrinking down, let's move those if we can, because what's happened is the capital should be what we're looking for instead of what we're trying to fix right damn now. And instead, we got a hybrid. Now we're looking forward, but we still have the right damn nows that we gotta fix. And we gotta do it out of capital to be able to get the funds. Because ultimately, you know, if you wanna talk about services that we could cut that is not mandated, you would have to look at the pool, the youth center, all these other projects, the park maintenance, all that. Those are services that don't get water to your house, don't get electric to your house, and doesn't take sewage away. Those are non-priority, but yet they are the priority. What happens is we divide all of our funds to that, and then when we start making cuts, we look at dispatch, we look at PD, we look at streets, parks, and the priorities are lopsided. So that's the reason why the capital is $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 jobs, because if we don't put it on there, we never get the funds to do it.
So, excuse me, sorry about that. It didn't help, I'm still, my last little bit of water, man. So, what we saw on the 27th, the previous time we met, I heard the phrase used a little while ago. I don't remember what the phrase was, but what we want to do. I'd like just a little bit of clarity. I don't imagine that's all we could do. It wasn't everything in the world. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a legitimate effort to do what we felt we could humanly accomplish in a year.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting that we stop talking about the details of the budget and then jump to whether we should be doing a bond or not. But I think it was sewer, Johnny, you helped me, but it was that estimate where you do the smart thing and do it over multiple years, and it costs twice as much. And I'm generalizing.
Correct.
You know, but I'm feeling a great deal of pressure to seriously consider a bond, so we can do the RDNs, the right damn nows, and get something accomplished. Because my approach was to lay out a 5-year plan for a lot of the stuff, but I heard a very strong argument to spend the money now. We don't have the money now, but we could get the money now. And I think if we go through the effort to do a bond, you know, we should fix everything that's even starting to lean towards needing repair, get it done right darn now, and then do some level setting after that. I mean, I don't know, you know, there is no good time for us to incur, you know, that type of debt, but it's always a good time for us to accomplish the things that we need to get accomplished. And pinching our pennies is getting us frustrated. Let's just, and I'm willing to sit here for the next 90 minutes, but I think we should seriously consider doing a bond and talk now about what it could cover. And we don't have to stop the conversation now. I'm just saying, I think the bond is now or later. And is it better now or later?
And Kevin, can I throw something in there? And I know Josue will get into what you can take out a bond on or for and what qualifies and all those sorts of things. But I just had a thought as I'm looking at what got cut out of Parks, Pool. If you look at this, pool, parks, it's quality of life. Those are quality of life issues. Those are all the things that council says, well, these are the things we want for our community. To me, they are the highest level kinds of things that people will vote for with the levy. Because they know, look, if I want my kid to be able to go to the pool and I want to be able to have the kids play on the ball diamonds, I guess I'm gonna have to pay a little extra because that's the way things are these days. That's an easier sell to me than you're gonna have to take out a levy for a necessity. Well, aren't you guys taking care of the necessities? You're supposed to be doing that. PD, pools, parks. Yeah, okay, I know, that's an extra, it's a quality of life. We're a boutique community. And most of us know we're a boutique community and we expect boutique kinds of things. Well, these are highest of the boutique. All the stuff that Johnny's had to cut, but they're all things that are why we live here. So, I mean, that's just another piece. I know there's a bond picture, but in terms of potential for levy, and I don't think that it would be a huge or painful amount of a levy to cover a 5-year, cover your parks and pool and recreational stuff.
And
Yeah.
we've listed
Gavin,
a list of,
go ahead.
when you're ready to talk about revenue opportunities, we did list a list of revenue opportunities that include levies, bonds that we could do to fund some of these activities.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that because I see the paid parking app is in the budget, but, you know, like we continue to not talk about that $100,000 plus revenue source. Go ahead, Gavin.
So, Josue or Johnny, can you help me just put this in context? So I'm sorry if I'm missing where it rolls up to. So like if we do the costs that are in this version of the budget, how does this compare to what we've done in the past? Meaning like if after this round of cuts and acknowledging there's still a $1.2 million gap, which is a big gap, that could go deeply into a bunch of these other categories. But if we did this, is this a step forward? Is this like a bunch of new investment that's covering some capital costs that we've been putting off for years? Could you just give me a sense of put this in context of how it compares to past years?
And by this, you mean the yellow?
Yeah, I'm assuming that the yellow is, you're saying the yellow is the stuff that's in the budget, right?
That's left in the budget, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm just trying to get a sense of like, if I'm looking at if we said, okay, we can do this, we find $1.2 million, easy thing. Then we can, does this like are you looking at this going, well that's a good step forward, or is that pretty much like what we've been doing?
Let me look here, I'll tell you what we did last year.
Some of it is a continuation, like sidewalks, for example. Sidewalks would be, sidewalks are breaking down. They just don't last forever. So items like sidewalks would be just replacing what's existing, maintaining what's existing. Things like the diving board are also that. The diving board is bad shape. It just needs to be replaced. We're not replacing one every year. But from a financial perspective, there's two things we try to do. One is cover the things that we need to be replaced from a capital perspective, things that need to be replaced, things that will need to be improved or maintained so that we prevent further deterioration of them. So sewer relinings, for example. There was one particular street we looked at last year where two ends were in terrible shape, but the middle was in decent shape. But we didn't want to just do the two ends without doing the middle section, because the middle section at some point was going to deteriorate and we would need to come back around. So we just relined the entire section because it was cost effective to do it at once. So in short, from a financial perspective, we try to make enough investments with the cash that we had, but not so much where we're depleting our reserves. So we've been intentional about the amount of money of reserves that we utilize each year. So as to accomplish the things that we need to get done, otherwise they're going to break down and leaves us in a pinch, and while also maintaining a good capital reserves in all of our funds. Does
Right,
that answer
and I
your
guess,
question?
not really.
Okay.
I think what I'm hearing is that doing that, which all makes sense, we're not putting aside money for capital expenses, and we're sort of barely keeping up at best. Is that a fair summation?
I think
Like that all makes sense. We got to make sure we can manage our reserves,
Yeah.
and then we're hearing, and you got all this stuff backing up.
Yeah.
So then, I guess I'll let you respond to that part first. But then the second part is the actual question. I'm trying to understand financially, how does this compare to what we've done in past years?
Yeah,
Is this
sure.
good,
Yeah, so
bad, ideally,
the first part,
percentage?
the
Yeah.
first part of your question is, in many of the funds, we do have capital transfers as an expenditure. So when we look at water, we look at what our operation's gonna cost, and we see if we have any money left over to move from our operating fund into our water capital fund, so that we're building up that capital reserve to take on big projects. So when we're able to do that out of different funds, we do it. Now, the general fund takes up a lot of activity because the general fund is one big transfer that supports a lot of different things that just don't have a revenue source. Our water fund has its own revenue source, right? It's got its fees. And so anytime that we're able to save money or have net income, we will take some of those available funds and move them into capital. So that's an answer to your first question. That it depends on the fund. We're able to save when we can. There's other funds that we just can't. There's no money left over at the end of the year, or we don't anticipate any excess revenues that we can put in capital. To your second part of the question, how does this compare to our overall expenditure? The proposed budget is 15, it's a non-balanced budget. It's 15,620,000. Last year's budget was 15,497,000. So it's a little more than last year, than our current budget.
I was actually looking just specifically at the capital
At the
pieces, because
capital?
I was under the impression that this is the large majority of
Yeah, yeah.
of the expenses. Anyway, all I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to figure out how to put this in context of,
I can answer
are
your
we,
question.
go for it, yeah.
$19,000 is what we spent last year on capital for the rentals. This year, it is $7,000. For streets, last year, we had budgeted $167,000, $60,000 of which is our match for the stormwater OPWC. This year is $199,500. So,
So a little more on that one, but the match.
we're
Okay.
about $100,000 more, but it's because we're trying to get things caught up.
Right.
Stormwater, we had 60,000, but we don't have revenue, so there's nothing.
Right.
It comes out of streets. And then if you want to go to parks, we had $94,000 last year. The year before, we had 53,000, and this year it's down to 28,950.
Okay.
So maybe I'll add another dimension, which is we haven't decided anything yet,
No,
right?
you're correct.
So, I
Right,
mean,
right,
yeah,
right.
so
You're
so
just
you're
asking
talking about like,
projection.
Yeah.
but I think what I look at when I look at this budget is what we projected for last year, and then we underspent. And we've done that the past couple of years because of COVID and whatever. But I mean, I think it goes back to what Josue said. We're talking about a slight increase in budget over what we decided, for last year. And so the question is, like, do we commit to that? So.
Well, you should probably point out how much ARA money and other
CARES Act
money you
money,
knew
yeah.
was gonna come in, because that tips that scale way
Sure.
over.
Right, we were conscious that we were exceeding our budget, or our structural budget, because we were expecting 392,000 in American Rescue money. And we booked that revenue as
Right.
just in 1 year. So that's 400 in the hole, if you will, without that
Right.
money. So we're operating on the basis that, hey, we're operating on a budget that included that one-time revenue source. 2023 doesn't have that equivalent revenue source. And then we've had the increased cost.
Right. I think the other thing I want to highlight is I really like the granular piece, because it kind of gets back to what we talked about in our first meeting, which is, every time we decide that, we're going to give this amount to a commission or to whatever, like, it means, we can't do some of these other things. So I think it is important for us to look at, what the small pieces are that support the pool and safety and whatever. So, I think that's really important. And again, I think it does come back to, we could make a decision to be, a bit transformative this year and like get things done, or we cut, but anyway, Johnny, I don't think, I don't think we should decide yet that we're, gonna spend like a quarter of the amount like on some of these things, just because, that's the way to balance the budget. Marianne?
So I remember a month or so ago when council was doing goals, we came up with really 2 goals, right?
Yep.
Infrastructure and housing. So, and in terms of this budget, and I hear what Judy's saying about the boutique stuff, but if I were gonna, what I think is most important is infrastructure, especially repairing infrastructure that in the end is gonna be saving us money. To me, that's water and sewer, maybe stormwater too, those 2 in particular, or those 3 in particular. And so that's what I would want to focus on.
Yep.
And I don't know how bonds work, and I don't know if it's what that relationship is with a levy, if it's related or not. And I don't know whether we should shift into now talking about looking at additional income as opposed to continuing to look at how we're gonna cut.
Right. Yeah, which, I think this segues into the next section, which is, what are our higher level priorities? Go ahead,
So
Gavin.
just one, I'm totally game to go there. I just want one more question. So does this include any staffing changes? Does this assume that this is just flat staffing?
Correct.
Does it include anything of overlap for Denise's position?
It does not.
Okay. I was just trying to get a sense of where we're at. So basically, this is status quo budget.
Status quo personnel.
Got it. Okay, cool, thank you.
The only personnel change is what you've heard from Paige, which it's not a net change.
Sure.
We're reclassifying.
But then it still has the 4% COLA, right?
And the 4% COLA,
Okay,
right.
cool.
And, we factor in all the step increases as well, and.
Yeah, okay.
And the new hires already in there because those positions were budgeted.
Although the new hires, any position that is currently funded this year, whether it's filled or vacant, it's projected into 2023's budget. So one of the things I walked you through in the personnel sheet was that deputy chief role. The deputy chief role, we did budget for it on the basis that it was either gonna be the sergeant role or the deputy chief role. The cost was gonna net out.
Mhm.
So we just titled it that. For us, changing it back to the sergeant role, the economics aren't gonna be any change.
Right. Carmen?
Now that just reminds me, I think that in the last meeting, we discussed what Public Works personnel situation looks like. And I'm still thinking about that, and it's still a little bit disconcerting. So knowing that this doesn't include any personnel is just, I don't know. I think that we still need to, I think it would be a good idea that if we, that we still considered like Public Works personnel and what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Kevin, do you have a comment at this point?
Bond.
Bond doesn't.
I mean, so yeah, I guess I do want to, all right, so let's dig in a little bit more to
Yep.
what this 1.2 million shortfall means, because I don't fully understand it. And yeah, I spent all afternoon like looking at everything, so I guess I want to, like talk a little bit more about.
And before we go there, Brian, if you don't mind, last year, staff did a great job, handed us a balanced budget, and we blew it up. We haven't started blowing it up yet. I mean, things that.
What do you mean blow it up?
Adding things to the budget.
Yeah, we added what, 80,000 maybe?
225.
Council didn't add that. I mean, not for council.
I mean, actually, yeah,
Not for council, but that was us.
I've listed the things that, I mean, we are already talking about, adding 200,000 plus with our council things, which, you know, I can go into later.
For 2023?
Yes, next year, like, based on the request I've seen so far, yeah, we're already at over 200,000, so,
Does that include the things that carried over? So we've got some status quo in there, so the 44,000 in council commissioned budget is in there, which Brian, you had talked about bringing.
so I've been listing like all the requests that have come in for commission so far.
Okay, so,
You know, also like a request from a nonprofit and, you know, some others, so, yeah, so I've been just kind of running a tally.
yeah.
It would be good for us to see that. I don't,
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
feel like, I guess I'd rather like understand this 1.2 million like shortfall, but I'm keeping a list, you know, whenever, you know, we need to
make
talk
that
about that.
transparent so we can see it.
Yeah, I'm not.
I mean, I'm
trying
not
to-
saying you're hiding it, but I wasn't aware that it was
It could be
that bad.
helpful.
Yeah, no, I definitely, yeah, I think we'll look at it tonight or, you know, at the next meeting or whatever, but, you know, I've just been keeping track of, you know, the EC request, the CASP request, the Home Inc. request, you know, et cetera, so I am keeping a list, but yeah, like, we will talk about it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But anyway,
So
but
to-
I want to understand this
Yes.
1.2 million shortfall.
So to put this 1.2 million shortfall from a cash basis perspective, we expect to end the year, this is just looking at the general fund. And now, we're mostly concerned with the general fund because all the enterprise funds will balance those out. Those need to stay within their respective revenue streams. So what drives a lot of the heartburn is what cash is available from the general fund. So this year, we expect to end the general fund with 1.6 million in cash. A balanced budget or relatively balanced budget, we need to be at $3.8 million to keep the cash reserves. 3.8 million.
Eight.
That's the money that we expect to generate in revenue. The budget is at 5 million, so that makes it a 1.2 million budget deficit. So any excess expenses beyond the 3.8 that we're gonna bring need to be covered through the cash reserves. So the cash reserves, we expect to be at the 1.6. If you have an excess expense of 1.2, that would drive your cash reserves, simple math, 1.6 million minus 1.2 puts you at 400,000. That's the net effect. Now, there is something that hasn't been factored into the cash balance this year, and that is we sold CBE property that netted 270,000. So I would need to bring that and estimated revenues to council so that we can load that cash into our cash reserve. So that helps cushion up our cash reserves. Now, our target cash reserves is we want to be above a 90-day cash reserves. So that's 33%. That puts us on an operating budget at over close to $900,000 that we want to have on cash reserves for the general fund. That's just the general fund. And that is, why do we want to have that amount of money? Well, that gives you operating cash to pay your bills. Not everything comes in as it goes out, so you need to have money to operating cash. And so that's the deficit we're looking at. That's the impact that we're looking at on our cash reserves. So there's getting us to the 90-day reserves. I think we can get there, and there's easier and harder ways to get there. I think the easiest way we can get to our cash reserve balance is the reciprocal tax. That is something that council has the authority to do. And I know that there are some challenges with it, but there's that. There's the bond levy, the bonds and the levies that Brian and Judy have discussed. They are Planning and zoning fees, that would yield significant less. I want to go back to the bonds and levies. There are two bonds that I think would have public support. A parks levy to support pool and park improvements and operations, and streets levies to fund operations and ongoing improvements. Those are things that are currently funded through the general fund, which is only an 8.5 mils operating levy.
Would that include the sewer and water and streets or?
It would free up money in the general fund that could be allocated to infrastructure projects.
Can you have a bond for sewer?
Yes, yes, we can have we can have a bond on any infrastructural projects. So sewers, water, electric.
And does
So-
does there a vote on it? Is that how it happens?
Yes, if you're looking for bonds and levies, it goes before the citizens because it's debt that is backed by the community.
Probably the last bond we had was for remodeling the Bryant.
Yes.
Back in the 90s.
Yep.
And
Do you
And then
remember
we
what,
paid it off, yeah, a couple years ago.
how
yeah.
much was that for? Do you remember what it was?
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
so, is there a reason why a police levy wouldn't be listed here also? I mean, are there, like basically, why is it you have these levies? Like, are there other levies that could be done?
Oh, yeah, so Beaver Creek, who's very supportive of their police, I don't know if it passed, did it pass?
It failed. Streets passed,
Street, and streets have passed by a small margin. So,
I don't think.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's something, I mean, this is something we need to figure, what we're deciding right now is what our community values, right? And part of that is figuring out, what does our community want? I'm just saying, if they're putting it all on the table, well then, let's at least have a full conversation about what all the dynamics are.
yeah,
Because, I mean, you're talking about 1.2 million, if we're talking about levies, well, then we're getting into the larger conversation about how do our needs at the village sit with the school's needs, with the township's needs, et cetera.
mhm.
At which point, from my perspective, the thoughtful way to approach this is that we're prioritizing all these things. And that if we're going to figure out how to ask the community about it, we should at least have a full list of all the things that we're talking about.
That's fair. That's
Okay,
fair.
so if there are other ones like that so you're saying this is stuff that you think could happen? You're
Yes.
concerned about the ability for that to happen. If there are other things that you feel like may be on this list, but you've kind of discounted because you feel like, I don't know if the community would support it, well, let's talk about it, because I mean, that's what this is deciding what
Yeah.
does the community want?
And the only one that we took off this list was the police.
Okay.
And Beaver Creek's approach was, let's put it all on the table,
Yeah.
right? Let's put streets and police on there.
Mhm.
And so just so I'm clear, the 1.2 million shortfall is with cuts.
With the 500,000 cuts that we've done.
Okay.
Yeah, there's still more
Okay.
that we would.
Could you
Need to
say, how much of the increase is wages and salaries as opposed to materials and, consultants and contractual services?
Yes, we, in the summary budget, that's the 5-page document. The general fund, if you're looking at page 48, those first rows, general fund, those are all the departments within the general fund. So that would be public safety, planning and zoning, administration, council commissions, everything that's in the general fund. So all those departments are listed in categories. So looking at personnel services, the actual, I have a couple actuals on this system. So for 2020, the actual for personnel services was $1,680,235. The 2021 actual was $1,688,917. We had some encumbrances that carry over from 21, so these are expenditures that carry over into the next budget year. So for 2022, the budgeted amount is $1,937,692. The budgeted amount for 2023 is $1,993,108. So there is incremental growth that happens from the budget process. Every year, we try to manage costs through vacancy opportunities. So this is one thing Paige talked about, that doing double duties, and so we're trying to contain costs by managing those vacancies. The managing the vacancies are key element of our strategy on payouts when we have significant cash out. So earlier in the year, I had asked for additional money for account bank reconciliations with our VIP system. It was a $15,000 proposal. I had shared it with Brian and Gavin as part of the finance committee. The way that we pay for that, we had to add it to the budget, but we're also managing the finance director vacancy. So we needed to add it as an expense, but we know we're having some savings by maintaining the vacancy. So those are things that we try to do we budget for the full load of what expenses we expect, but throughout the year, we manage vacancies and we manage costs. There's some things that are controllable, there are other things that are not. Like the police department overtime, when things happen, whether it's a case or events. So there are some things that we just can't control.
So, but if we're talking about I'm trying to think like big picture. If we're talking about $1.2 million gap with a basically status quo staffing budget, let me just tell you how I'm hearing it, and you tell me if I'm missing big chunks.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a chunk that's increased costs for staff. That's a chunk.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounded like it didn't change too much from 22 to 23, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then we have a bunch less revenue that's from, we don't have the
American Rescue money.
right?
300,000.
That's 400,000. That's a big hunk.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand. Like, I still feel like I'm missing. Like, what are the other big hunks? Like, why are we, if we're doing status quo staffing, why are we 1.2 million off? I get where the 400's from, but give me a sense of where the 800's from.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it is things cost more.
Yes.
But I mean, that's not the only piece of that answer.
There are things that cost more. There are things that one-time expenses that we didn't have this year, like a vehicle that's being budgeted in 2023, right? Those are on every other year. So there are things, one-time expenses that are scattered.
Mm-hmm.
We did put in money for a matching fund for the water meters. Is that 100?
That's in the water.
You put that in the water? Okay. There are a few things that are, street relining, the sewer relining, did you put that in
That's
sewer too?
sewer.
Okay.
So on some level, nothing notable. I think what I'm trying to get at is, like, from my perspective, it sounds like we got a structural challenge, right? We had a big hunk of money that came from the feds.
There
And
has,
now we're just so we're all having a reality check that, like, just even making the basics. So we're sitting here, we want more staff, and we're like, uh-oh, right? I mean, that's just the reality, right?
Well, there's an interesting piece here because, Johnny in his presentation talked about there have been things that staff have been able to do that have saved money. Last year, staff did enough work that they saved enough money to buy a piece of equipment that they needed to have. So that's something that you can accomplish when you've got trained, seasoned workforce. And so while we're, interestingly, I think just saying, well, we know that things cost more now, so if we're going to do this amount of feet of sidewalk, it's going to cost this much more because of materials. But the ancillary calculation, which is the job market, we are not making that calculation. And I don't think that calculation is happening here. And I do think that there will be a rebound effect because the village does save a great deal of money because staff are able to accomplish things that we would have otherwise had to contract out to do.
Well, and Johnny, I also saw you going through those
With
sheets, so
6 full-time.
what else are you thinking about
I mean,
related to this
you're
discussion?
talking $1.2 million, you're cutting everything. Just to put it in perspective, you would literally cut everything in streets, parks, and, Bryant Center, pool and all that, it's 1.4 million. That's operations, that's, capital projects, that's everything. So literally, that's the kind of cuts you guys we're talking about, you know?
Yeah, and you get what I'm saying, right? I'm just looking at it like,
It
if
is
we,
a structure issue.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
it
it's
is.
not a new one.
It's not a new one.
And that's what I'm trying to understand, is like, what happened? How did we get to a point where 1.2 is a big, and that's really 1.7 arguably, it sounds like, to stay relatively flat with spending this year? Because it sounds like what we've got here is with cuts. So I'm just trying to understand what happened that got us to a point that we're 1.2 or more off.
Well, our revenues can't keep up with rising cost.
Mhm.
So that's sort of an ongoing challenge.
Mhm.
The way that our streets, parks are funded, they're all funded at the mercy of the general fund through transfers. There's no dedicated revenue stream that's just solely for that. So every year, there's a case to be made how much money gets transferred to pay for pool, pay for park staff and street staff. And Brian, you've been on council, I'm sure that that's always been a point of discussion between
Sure.
administration and.
You know, and also, people keep moving into Yellow Spring. A lot of older people, a lot of retired people. A lot of retired people are moving into Yellow Springs.
Yeah.
And they don't pay income tax.
Yeah.
So they're bringing money into the community, but they're not bringing money into the village government substantially, which is, I mean, I don't know whether the idea of having some kind of voluntary contribution that Tony Bent,
Right.
former
Yeah.
village council person, talked about some years ago. I don't know if that makes sense, but that might be on the table.
I submit it
because-
does make sense.
Because
Well,
we
I
have
mean, that
lots of,
capital
we have
gains
lots
tax
of
thing
wealth
is-
in this
yeah.
community.
Right, but I don't understand why we chase that rabbit down that hole, but we don't want to look at the rabbit that's sitting in front of our crosshairs, which is reciprocal tax.
I'm
We're not-
saying
we're
all
not-
of it.
we
I
are
think we need to
looking at
look at
that.
all of it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so what I've said about the reciprocal tax is we're gonna have that joint meeting, even if it's just council, have that joint meeting.
Looks like
And we're
that's
gonna
what it
talk
may be.
about reciprocal
Yeah.
tax.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, but that is also only at best case scenario, 427,000 or whatever, so.
Right.
That doesn't make up for the 1.2 million.
Yeah.
So, I mean, right, even if we go like full on, so, yeah, I mean, that's not the only solution. But
No.
it is one that I think we're ready to confront as a
And that
council.
would be if we do no reciprocality.
I think, I think you
If we
would
get
want
to
to phase
400,
it
it'd be
in.
no reciprocal,
Yeah, I think you would want to phase it in.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I don't think we'd go for like the full, like whole hog.
Yeah, I like all of you guys.
But
Right.
again, it's making people who are working, you know, and who are already paying taxes,
Yeah.
whereas people who come here, and they come here because they have money, and they can afford to just buy our expensive houses.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But anyway, it's a piece of addressing this, but it doesn't address the whole thing.
No, it doesn't.
So-
And you know, there's also the government finance, municipal finance. A lot of the design and the system to keep everything afloat and paying for things, there's no structural balance to it. So for example, our current operating levy, it's a levy from 2006 that doesn't adjust to inflation, doesn't adjust. There is a growth adjustment, but you're expected to have a significant amount of growth just to stay up to current expenses. We haven't had significant amount of growth. And that's not a challenge that's unique to Yellow Springs. That is everywhere throughout the country, that we are building infrastructure, we're building developments, and the financing to keep up with all that infrastructure isn't there. It just isn't there. So what we're experiencing from just having, our money just doesn't cover the same thing that it covers last year, because we're stuck in this situation where we have to add significant amount of people, more homes, more taxpayers, more businesses, just to stay on track with expenses. And yeah, it's difficult to do in communities. So without those things, you're left to having to go back to the taxpayers to get more money from the same tax base, which is what a streets levies is, or what a parks and pools levy is, what is also adjusting the reciprocal tax rate. Well, reciprocal tax rate, I think there's an equity issue there. That's.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's appropriate to ask now, but I guess I'm interested, Josue, from your perspective, what's your sense of how you would close this gap?
How do I close this gap? You know, this is where I pray for forgiveness and patience from my executive team, because they all don't get what they need and what they want. And that's my job.
So,
Can I suggest something?
Yeah.
Are we talking about assessments at all? I mean, because you can do sewer lining, and you can assess the affected property owners for where the sewer lining is going, and that's a possibility. Same with sidewalks, maintenance and repair. Maybe we need to consider giving the sidewalks back to the property owners for maintenance and repair, or so that we can assess when we do have to do that, and that would maybe help.
Yeah.
Gavin, I'm sorry, I might have been too narrow in my interpretation of your question. How I will close the gap. I would adjust planning and zoning fees. So first I would start off with reciprocal tax. I would adjust the reciprocal tax to at least to 50%. That would bring in a little over 200,000. I would adjust planning and zoning fees, and I will ask taxpayers for a streets levy and a parks levy.
and do you have any information about the expected revenue on these other pieces besides the reciprocal tax?
Well, the parks and streets levy, those are really for us, for council administration to determine what do we need and what do we want to ask for from our citizens. So Johnny just mentioned how much of that transfer is going to operations. So we're a little over $1 million on just operations for our streets department and our parks department.
And the pool
And the pool.
Bryant Center.
So it's like, I don't, we came out to like 1.1 with, just personnel was over 700,000 just for those transfers out of.
So, just make sure I'm hearing this right. So for instance, if we did a street, parks, and pool levy that covered all those things, that could conceivably, turn a $1.2 million gap.
Yeah.
And a 1.1 million for those areas.
You wouldn't want to do it just for that, because you would only maintain what you're doing. You wouldn't be able to fix nothing.
Yeah.
So you would want to do more for the levy, so you can put back in capital funds, and so you can plan the projects out.
Sure.
So you can keep up. So you would need to do more.
Okay, but there's a
But-
big
but-
hunk there, you're saying
Oh, yes.
conceivably.
Oh, yes. And to
Okay.
put that in perspective, the township is asking or asks for 3.5, and that generates about $1 million a year.
The one they just did, you're saying?
Yeah, the one that just passed.
Okay.
60/40.
So I think
That was the number this year.
one thing I'm like hearing from this discussion is I'd like to more completely drill down on the 1.2 million gap and like what that really means. I think levies are interesting. I would say as a side note, we have a 750 million operating levy, that we renew every 5 years. So I would imagine people asking questions about like why another levy, so I mean, I'm not opposed to looking at that strategy. I guess I really want to understand because, when I look at sidewalks, I mean, we're talking about 70,000. So that's not, a big like chunk of that 1.2 million.
And we took it out.
Right.
That's not even
Right.
in that 1.2 million anymore.
Right. But, so again, like, yeah, I really, very interested in these like bigger infrastructure issues, which is why I think, and Kevin said it as well, like the bond thing. I really want to think about like what's actually going to make a big impact. So I think we need to think about that. But at the end of the day, like we do need to drill down on what this 1.2 million gap is
Yeah,
about.
And most of it is driven by the transfers that we're making outside of the general fund. So those transfers are 849,270 for 202, which is our streets repair. 647, which is our parks, and then 306, which is 118,000. And that makes up the majority of those transfers. So the rest of it, there's 81,000 that we transfer to police pension because our inside millage does not cover all of our police pension, the transfers. We make up for the difference. So that gets us to 1,696,000. So that 1.2 is part of that
Right.
massive transfer.
Well, it's interesting to hear that
Yeah.
800,000 plus is about streets because I don't know, like our streets seem like pretty decent to me. I mean, so I don't know, but anyway, I think like part of this is prioritizing. I'm much more concerned about the sewer, water, like other stuff, than I am about like, maybe we've got some like terrible streets, but it seems like they're in pretty good shape.
We talked about participatory budgeting for a decade or so. Haven't really done anything about it. But if we're going to do levies, certainly we're going to have to provide some education to the community. And it might be a way to bring this issue directly to people and show this is how much we pay for our public safety department. This is how much streets, parks, infrastructure, everything. And this is the value we get out of those, and start having some kind of community dialogue about, okay, where's the value here?
Yeah.
As a precursor to putting a levy or more than one levy, whatever.
And you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, I
talking
think-
about
I think-
levies,
I think
but
that might be a
talking about
longer-
I'm not
Yeah,
talking
maybe
about
for next year.
March.
And one thing is true, I do agree with you, Mary Ann, that education is important. We want to educate the public to the best of our ability before we spring something on them, if you will. And I know we wouldn't do it that way. But from an overall timing perspective, blame it on Ukraine, blame it on COVID. This is the time where everybody's expenses are going up. So everybody at home is doing it. And so when we acknowledge that we've got to do it because of the costs of things, it's not a leap. It doesn't take a leap of faith to understand it because everybody's living it. And oh, by the way, regarding the sidewalks, I think the village has done such a great job. I'm just one person, but I would take responsibility because everything is fixed. Everything's great. It's perfect. Hopefully those more mature trees won't keep growing. But I suspect that those sidewalks in front of my house are going to be okay for the rest of my life. So me saying I'll take responsibility for it is a different thing. But I'm saying, and I think when some people here put the responsibility for sidewalks on the homeowners, I don't think they're hearing fix them first. Then you hand over future maintenance. That's the way I understood it.
So, I guess I just want to say, like, unless maybe you can make sure we're saying this right. I would love for this to be a inflation-related issue, but this is not an inflation-related issue, right? But a relatively small portion of this is related to cost increases, right?
How relative that is, I think it's.
You think more than a third of this is related to cost increases?
At least a
Well,
third.
You think so?
I do.
I think in that one example that Johnny gave, we're going to lock in potentially lock in a cost for services, I don't, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars is gonna increase, you know, if we don't lock in at that current price. So it's, I mean, everything costs more. It's not, you know.
The
it's
part
not
two for
nobody's
me
fault.
is, the reason I bring it up is because part of the thing I'm trying to understand is like, it does seem like too late to begin a participatory budgeting process. And I'm trying to understand, what do we do as a body so that we're not sitting here right now doing this? Because this is a bummer, right? And if it's purely like costs just went up like bananas for the last 3 months, and now it's like, but something else happened here. Like we have to have seen this coming more. And so we as a body got to figure out, how do we get into a position where we're not trying to figure out how to cut massively or have to act quickly on something like a levy or anything else that's going to be part of the conversation we've all been trying to be thoughtful around, which is, how are we doing our part around the tax base?
Right.
Well, I will say, I mean, you know, Josue highlighted in his PowerPoint that was in the packet that deferred maintenance was an issue. So, you know, back when the village was flush with 5 like high tax paying, you know, entities, a lot of things didn't happen, you know, so we were left with like a 50-year-old water plant or whatever. So, I mean, that's definitely an issue. I think, you know, the other like piece of this is, yeah, you know, the last 2 years we cut a lot of what we did. And I think part of that was, you know, trying to be conservative like during the pandemic or whatever. And so, so the team pulled back on a lot of things, you know, that, and, you know, we pulled things in-house and whatnot. So I do think those are 2 important factors that, you know, kind of relate to where we're at, you know, in the time that I've been on council. And, you know, and so we've built up capital budgets, but we've also, like, we had a lot to, like, spend because of that deferred maintenance. So those have, like, been run down. So I think that's part of what Johnny's told us, is we need to build those capital budgets back up. So anyway, you know, I guess I don't feel like it's knee-jerk as much as we've tried to, like, keep that budget balanced since I've been on council, and done a good job, because prior to that, we did not have a balanced budget. So, so anyway, so we've been pretty conservative. And I guess that's why I'm kind of pushing for, like, I think we should kind of be a little bit bold and do something different. So.
Yeah, and I'm very interested in the idea. I'd love to talk more about the bond options and just, you know, what that, but just so make sure I understand. So we've had a balanced budget, but we're balanced with significant deferred maintenance, with significant deferred capital costs.
Correct.
Correct? Okay, so it's just like there's a sort of coming home to roost situation. It's balanced, that's better than not balanced, but there's still a bunch of stuff that didn't get in that we need to address at some point.
Right.
Okay, I was just making
Well,
sure I understand.
I have a question about bond. So, you know, if everyone got really super together and lucky and you passed a levy in March, revenue would start coming in January of 2024. So you're still looking at, this doesn't help us right this minute. You can project it out. Yes, that's true. But then a bond is more immediate, to my understanding. So,
Yes.
I mean, those are all things that have to get kind of weighed into the balance that's at that kind of higher level conversation about, okay, what happens when, and then how does it impact what does or doesn't get cut here? Because the other piece of it, frustratingly, is if you could do a chunk of things right now, they're gonna cost exponentially less than if you cost them out over the next 5 years for a lot of those infrastructure pieces. So,
Yeah, and that gets us to a strategy of how do we what is the approach we want to take to raising money. I like the approach of continuous levies because they allow us to secure a revenue stream for an extended period of time. And given that we have some unstructured elements in our budget, like unfunded streets, unfunded parks and pools, I think we care about these things, and we can make the case that these should be funded continuously, because those are key assets in our community. We want good parks, right? We want good streets. So,
Well, but that levy was brought in on the backs of, it is going to fund your streets, your parks, your pools. That is how that passed.
yes.
So
and-
the case is not, you're gonna have to pass something to pay for these things because you didn't do it before. It is, revenue hasn't kept up,
Mhm.
but that levy passed for those very reasons. I mean, I think it's a different narrative. We're just saying it in different ways, but it's important because older villagers are gonna tell you, oh, heck no, I passed that levy because I wanted streets, parks,
Okay.
pools.
In 2006,
Yes.
right,
Yes.
in 2006,
Yeah.
which,
And that's property tax.
and that's property
Putting on
taxes.
property tax.
Yeah. And on the income tax side, the reciprocal tax helps bring in some of that additional revenue. I don't know if council will be interested in looking at, do we have the right income tax rate? I think that's a much more extensive conversation. Xenia is at 2.25, Dayton is at 2.5, Columbus is at 2.5. We're at 1.5. Some of these other municipalities don't have a school income tax, so you also have to weigh that, like what is the net income tax on the residents? So there are those other revenue opportunities. So the bond, we can certainly look at an immediate bond to finance some of these capital projects, come up with a number, and we can start engaging bond counsel or having some of those conversations. With a bond, it's expensive to have bond counsel, so you want to look at doing a whole lot of projects, something more than $1 million, so that you are utilizing the value of bond counsel, because it does cost money. So we could look at what is the capital projects. We've got a list of capital projects. Some go out as far as 10 years. What can we fund that would be appropriate to fund, things that will yield savings down the road, and they're cheaper to do now than it would be waiting years to do. So we could look at that and come up with a cost or a figure that we could explore a bond. But we could do that, and I also would like council to consider all those other revenue opportunities.
Seems like it would be good if we could have, not a spreadsheet really, but a sheet that lists all the things we've talked about. Maybe there's some other, and then what it would look like, what we have to do to get there, what we might use the money for, when it would kick in if we did it, the pros and the cons. So we're looking at, half a dozen potential income sources.
Mhm.
for-
Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of, I think, segues into the last part of the meeting, which is next steps. I mean, I do think we have a few more issues to, kind of really chow down on or whatever, and maybe those can happen in the context of a council meeting. I don't know, I guess we've got to decide if we are going to schedule another work session. But, so a clear next step to me is, I think there's still ambiguity about the 1.2 million shortfall.
Okay.
So, whatever do we need to talk about there to understand that? I like Mary Ann's thought about, we do need to start thinking about revenue options, beyond paid parking, and figure out what we're gonna do there. I guess,
Fees. We talked about different various fees. Looking at the value of our cost of, you planning, you zoning fees, whatever.
Planning and zoning fees.
Right.
You list a couple things, we said we don't want to forget about those.
And
why
again,
aren't why isn't planned parking paid parking on the list? Sorry.
I'm not sure. I always ask for it to be there because I don't understand why.
I mean, I'm open to it. I don't.
Yeah, why every other municipality that's a destination has paid parking, but we don't. But I did see there's a line item for the parking app.
Yeah,
So,
we have.
I guarantee we would make 100,000, probably 200,000 a year, you know, and.
The city of Athens, which I know not comparable in population, but also very destination similar in that respect, they bring in just under $800,000 a
Oh
year
my
in
gosh.
parking enforcement.
And they're only twice as big as us, so, yeah,
We'll take 400.
yeah. So,
Well, we have an agenda item that we want to bring at our next agenda planning, and that is, you know, our EV charging stations are down. We need to replace them, so we're bringing a proposal to replace those, pay for that, and implement a EV pay-to-charge system.
Yeah.
right,
So we could roll it into,
But not for general revenue, that'd go back to the electric fund.
oh, see, there you go, that's right,
Good looking out.
yep.
I put too much money into
Yeah,
it.
and then I think the third thing is, yeah, we should have a short list of like what we could do with a bond issue, which, I mean, we'd sell those bonds like that. I mean, yeah, we wouldn't have a problem. And I know it's not familiar to everyone, but I mean, you know, the bottom line is, you know, we have to pay a little bit of like interest on those bonds, but you know, the returns in terms of what we would save short term would be huge.
And we're paying the interest to ourselves.
Exactly.
if we buy the bonds ourselves,
Yeah, I mean,
which
that's
we
the-
can, yes.
Right, right.
Yeah, there's that up.
But can I back up to a point that Mary Ann said, and I heard it say, bonds don't fix staffing problems. Bonds are fixing infrastructure and other things, but if you don't have the staff, you might as well not even pull the bonds.
And that's what, I think
Yeah.
that I would like to see, looking at the whole organization, the staffing of the whole village government, do we have the right number of people in each department? Are they doing what we need to be done? Because, I mean, it seems like Denise could use more people. I could see more people at administration. You've said you have 4 people doing 10 people. So is our staffing appropriately placed? And there's a case to be made, I think, for having more staff can sometimes save money.
Let me answer that question with a statement. Do we have enough staff to do what a normal village our size does? Absolutely. Do we have enough staff to do what Village Yellow Springs wants us to do? Hell no. No, we don't. We're staffing a village, we're staffing a Cincinnati with the village staff. Would you agree?
100%.
I mean, and to be honest, I told Josue this today. I may not have one whole department by January. Because guess what? They got applications everywhere else. You know what their driving factor is? They're gonna pay more and I'm doing one job
I can say the same.
by January. And it's gonna be a crucial one.
And then
You
you
may
get
not have a
into,
power back on for 9, 10 hours. Because the electric department, water department, every one of them's got applications in.
Yeah.
I can't do nothing about it.
We're Mayberry staff. We're
I've been,
not-
I've
we're
been,
not
I've been bringing this to
boutique
council and
town
bringing it to
staff.
council, and until they walk out, I don't think anybody's listening. And it's a fact.
Yeah.
That's why my week's been bad, because I'm trying to figure out how to maintain the services, keep staff happy, come in here and cut and cut and cut and cut, and then go back to staff and say, sorry guys, we're cutting some more, and they're like, you know what, I'm done, I'm out. We're not getting paid what we should get paid for one job, and we're doing 10 jobs, and I can go over here and make more money. Prime example was Joe Bates. He left and he made the same amount of money, went to Xenia, 5 minutes down the road, and is getting paid the same amount of money to do one job versus doing 3 jobs here. And it's all across the board. So,
But, you know, that being said, and, you know, maybe you didn't hear everybody, but like Gavin is advocating for, you know, like figuring out staff. I think we're all saying, we're not trying to cut, we're trying to figure out,
no,
so.
I agree with it.
So
We're
we
all
are-
saying and we're all trying to figure it out.
So we are listening, and yeah,
But I don't think we're gonna get it figured out too much until the staff walks out.
well,
Because it's
I'd like to
always gonna
see
be a
you-
back
I'd
burner
like,
item.
I mean, Paige has made requests for changing staffing, and I'd like to see that
Well,
from
then-
you. In the, you know, this kind of thing.
Okay.
That, then we can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I'd like to think that any team members listening to this meeting would walk away thinking we are trying to figure out, like, not how to cut, but how to, like, make this all work. And so, yeah, so,
And just as an equity piece, I mean, when we look at staffing, when I made the comment about being a boutique community, it's literally across the board. We expect a police officer to show up at our house. If our neighbor's dog is barking, we expect them to show up and mop up our kitchen floor. We expect them to resolve the sexual assault that just happened. And we expect that our power comes on time. All of the things. We want all of the things. And so I think it would do well to be very careful about putting a particular department on the chopping block and saying, yeah, but those guys,
Absolutely.
I mean, we don't need them that bad, do we? But we definitely want you guys. It's similar to, we love firefighters. We're going to pass that. We know that, but we don't so much like police. We have to look at what are the needs? What are the needs? How are they getting covered? And when you have a supervisor saying, I have people ready to walk out unless they can have some of these things, I think that should be carefully listened to. And Johnny, I do think that part of what council's doing is saying, what can we pull in terms of revenue to take pressure off some of this, which would then put some more money into those areas that you're asking about in terms of staffing. So I do think that's all at the table. I just think it's been kind of hard to hear some of the pieces because they're.
And I want to see, 1, 2, whatever, this is what you want in your budget. This person to do this person to.
yeah, this is definitely, I think we're the opposite of cutting. And, I mean, I know we all have our bad days, but I also hear people all the time say they do love working at the village, and I think that's partly because we have a great leadership team, and it is kind of fun, and we've got a challenging community, which makes it fun as well. I was telling the story about the day I walked into the staff meeting and the tinfoil hat was on your chair or whatever. So anyway, so I mean, there are a lot of great things about working for our community. So anyway, I definitely feel like we want to figure out how to retain.
Yeah.
So you gotta definitely help us figure out how to do that. So
Well, and Brian, you guys do have a budget session built into the front end of your meeting on the 21st. You have a 6 to 7 budget.
Check-in, yeah.
yep.
So,
So can I just make sure, just to go back to the bond thing just for 1 second, I understand it doesn't cover operating, but if I understood the way we're talking about it, there are things that we would save from, if we did a bond, that could then go to operating, right? So I understand the bond couldn't pay for it. But if you took it off the books over here, you could then use it.
Yep.
So, I mean, there can be some moving around.
Yes.
And I think what I'm hearing is we want to do these things, and to your point, I guess I look at it like we have made cuts functionally already. We've already done that. So I don't, Paige, when I say hey, let's talk about let's add the police levy. It's not because I'm saying, oh, we got to go after police. I'm looking at it we've already gone after the places where we're overworked, functionally. It's happened to you when you haven't had enough people this last year. It's happened to Johnny when he's saying he's got 4 people doing 10 people's jobs. Ever since I started here, I've been telling Josue I feel like he needs to hire somebody. How is this possible? You can do all these things. Anyway, so we've already made those cuts. We're already doing that. And so the idea of what do we need is absolutely the question. And I think that's the thing we have to struggle with as a group is what are our needs and then figure out which of those things to go to the community ask for. It's hard.
So really quickly, I just wanted to get this out before
Yes.
I forgot. I wrote it down. So yeah, right, staffing, and then how do things happen effectively? So things happening and everyone having kind of their hands in all kinds of things, one person doing 3 jobs, what happens to the effectiveness over the 3 jobs? If you're doing 3 jobs, one of the jobs is not as good as the other 2. So something is suffering there. I just wanted to get that out. But the $1.2 million shortfall, right? Can we have something in writing, a 1-page document that lays out exactly what's what? Because going through the budget's okay, But when you're going through when you're going through the budget, you have to do line item after line item to do your own math. Can we get something in writing? Just a one-page document. And then the other piece is, you brought up quite a while, boards and commissions. And I know that there was 20,000, 25,000
Yep.
for Pride, at least that, from PACC, but can we get, I can go and like look and see and have an estimate of what I think it is, but since you're keeping a running list, can you go and maybe make another one-page document and make it available to council?
Yeah.
It'll be super
Yeah.
helpful for both
And
of us.
and I haven't been like, it's not like I've been keeping that back.
Oh,
I
sure.
just,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just,
No.
as
No, of
I've like
course. I
heard
mean,
the
'cause
requests,
I have, a list, but it's not probably not the same as your list and not as complete.
Yep.
Right? So if we can have
Yes.
something that we can kind of look at, that, I think that would be super helpful for
Can
everybody.
we send
too.
Judy all of our lists? Can we send all of our lists to Judy? If you got a
I mean,
list, send it to Judy.
Brian's got
Well,
email.
got a list,
yeah.
anybody.
You CC?
Anybody in the room. If anybody in the room has a list,
Okay.
send it to Judy,
Okay.
okay? Yeah, just so we can have a list. I mean, it's a bunch of notes floating around, but there's no list. There's no real
Right.
list. So, and I don't want to know what's on anybody's list right now.
Well,
just
I
want
think,
all of them
I
to
think
be
the
one
bottom
list.
line is, this council, has the political will to do something transformative. And, we've talked about being bold. And, so let's do it now while we've got like AAA rating and everything else. And, we're solid and, not continue to kick the can down the road. I think that's the bottom line. And so,
Agreed.
yeah, and
So-
Johnny, I just want, you to like realize we're genuine in this, so we just gotta like, work together to figure it out. But I get, like, you're on the front line, it's frustrating as hell, like, so I can't even imagine. But we're not just like, we're not just talking, like, we wanna actually do something, I think, is what I hear, so.
So I got a couple of things. One, I appreciate all the openness and appreciation for the team. I think one of the things that this community is so great is the performance of this government. We deliver on everything. So I appreciate that, and I look forward to having those conversations about staffing. Where we are, where do we want to be, and where do we need to be? In terms of tangible actions, I will write up the list of what are bond eligible activities and what will be a recommended amount, and how that would alleviate pressure on the current operating budgets and capital budgets. Two, I think in line with that bond activity would be what will come out of that 1.2 million deficit. How would that alleviate that deficit?
Yep.
So I've got that. You'll circulate your list?
Yes, and then
You'll
I
kinda
think,
write up-
be prepared for the full-on reciprocal presentation at the beginning of December, because, we've said we're gonna talk about that, whether the other taxing entities participate or not, but seems like the township is going to.
And I did share with NYSDC yesterday, that conversation needs to happen.
Right.
Because it's sort of holding up.
Yep,
didn't
we've
tell-
pushed it off for long
Yeah.
enough. And I guess I would say, my opinion is I would de-emphasize working on additional levies. I think that's, right now with all the levy stuff going on, I think that's gonna be a harder, sell. So, I'm not saying those are.
I'd like to have the list of everything we've talked about, and we can have the pros and cons.
Sure.
of
But I
everything.
guess I'm just saying, in terms of
Reject-
like things to focus on, I see that as being like a less valuable use of time right now, so. my
So don't go
opinion.
make a levy committee.
Well, I can get a timeline of like, when would council need to pass the legislation, when would it have to be into the Board of Elections, all of those kinds of things, because again, you're not looking at any kind of revenue until January of 2024 at the soonest, and, I don't think you want to lose sight of the fact that I don't think inflation's going to go away soon. We're headed into a recession, and if voters don't think that it makes sense, they will vote it down. I mean, you're asking people, is this worth it to you? Do you want to do it? And if they say no, they say no. But not counting on it and seeing if it'll pass I don't think you lose necessarily. If you make your case, then people know very clearly if cuts are made, they understand why those cuts are being made, if that's the only thing that happens. I don't think it's a bad thing to.
Well, we have to prioritize, so, But, fair enough, like, we should have the full menu of options. Gavin?
And then like, I think this is what you're talking about, just the slide that says revenue opportunities, like, so like raise utility rates, is that, what's the, like there's part of me, it sounds like we've frozen rates for a few years.
We have.
And there's part of me that's going, why? Like if we're this far behind, maybe we should have been raising rates so that we wouldn't be this far behind. So even if you could just give us some idea of what the revenue, if you go up by X%, what's the amounts? Like,
You've got a presentation coming on the 21st.
okay,
Rate study.
that's
It was
part of the
supposed to happen on the
21st,
7th, but
got it, okay.
Yeah. Now, on the quick note on the rate study, on the rates, we were intentional about top-down, bottom-up review of our utility structure and identifying opportunities. And as a result of that, we found sanitary flow losses, water losses, and, we worked to address that. Now we looked at that and we've exhausted all those cost-saving opportunities.
Well, and we're also in the midst of a pandemic, so
Oh, yeah, that's
we're
true.
being sensitive to, I mean, that's actually, yeah, we were on track to regularly raise rates, but we pulled back on that the last 2 years, which I think was the right decision. So we are past 7, so I'm inclined to wrap things up, but yeah,
Just a process.
Yeah.
We have a finance committee. Does it make sense for the first the first review of income opportunities to be done by the finance committee and then to report to council?
sure.
It's a
See?
question.
I mean,
You wanted it.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have anything else on our agenda, right? So let's add that. Yeah, well, you're hesitant or?
No, I mean, I'm
I mean,
open
we
to it,
can- we can
especially
help.
if it's a time saver, meaning like if we can do it and then not get delayed in having the full group. But I mean, the reality is most of these things are primarily political questions at this point.
But we can help put together
Well, I mean,
the
there's
list and
how much
whatnot.
money something would make, when it would come in, what has to be done to get it. And there are some things we haven't
Sure.
even talked about too, which
Right. I mean,
Okay.
we won't have it for the 21st, but we could have it for the first meeting in December.
Well, it's not like we're gonna kick it in next month.
Right,
It's really gonna
right.
be sometime next
Yeah,
year,
no,
at least to work on it.
I think it's totally appropriate, and we, also should get prepared for that meeting in December. So, anything else?
Just
Gavin?
as you're looking at the revenue stuff, just if you could just kind of use the screen of if there are any progressive opportunities on any of these things, meaning like, is it possible to make it so that there are if we give sidewalks back, that we give sidewalks back with at an income threshold? Is there are basically anywhere? 'Cause just to put this really simply, if we could figure out how to close this gap with the people who I know have the money, then obviously we would do that. And so it's like anything that we can do, and the reciprocal tax is one example, right? Where there's a set of people that are not chipping in. But anything we could do that figures out how do we get the wealthiest people in town to pay more, please identify that.
Indian Hills capital gain tax.
That thing, let's
Yes.
call Rita. I mean, just anything. It seems like it's limiting in terms of what's possible. I do feel like it'd be worth talking to Amy about it, just to make sure. Because honestly, if I understand correctly, basically, let's figure out what's going to get us sued and what's not. I'm serious. Like we're at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So I think I'm gonna entertain a motion to adjourn.
And,
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, and boys soccer team kick butt.
Oh, my.
I'm sure they already are. Huh?
It is streaming.
I saw.